The Syrian army has raised the national flag in the main square of the border town of Yabroud after seizing control of the last major stronghold of insurgents. The army's conquer comes days after operations and months of planning. Syrian troops also had the backing of fighters from the Lebanese Hezbollah movement. The takeover of Yabroud will cut militant supply lines. The advance is considered a major gain for the Syrian army, which has been engaged in a fierce war against foreign-backed insurgents for 3 years. Observers say the takeover of Yabroud will affect the situation not only in Syria but also in Lebanon and the occupied Palestinian territories. Well, to discuss that further, we're now joined by Ali Risk, Press TV's correspondent, who's joining us live now from Yabroud. Now, Ali, a lot of talk about the ramifications of this gain in Yabroud of the Syrian army. Tell us a bit about the ideas of what kind of effect this will have.
Well, Waqar, as we were discussing yesterday, this is considered a very big strategic turnaround, or a very big strategic phase in this confrontation. I'm just going to show you now at the same time. If you heard there, that's the there was just a bombshell right now. This is cleansing by the Syrian army, clearing out the area, clearing out what remains, small pockets, which are really just to make sure that the city is completely free and liberated. We have heard these shells a few times. What you can see right now on your screens is the destruction, the debris of the buildings. This is the result of the Syrian warplanes, which launched air raids against this city, against these locations where the armed groups had taken refuge. That is what the Syrian army, as I said before, prior to entering inside the city, launched these air raids, which very much facilitated taking control and seizing the area, seizing the city of Yabroud, which was considered to be the stronghold of the militants. Now, what you see now is more debris, more of the destruction as a result of the Syrian air raids, the Syrian army using intense air force power against these locations before actually entering inside the city and defeating the first line of defense of the armed groups. And from what I hear from the armed or army personnel here is that once the first line of defense was defeated or fell, then it was quite easy. There was a collapse of morale on the side of the armed groups. One other issue which also did have a very big impact on the morale or on the fighting spirit of these armed groups was the fact that the Syrian army was able to actually defeat or assassinate many of the leading figures or the commanders of these armed groups, of these Al-Qaeda affiliates. For example, there was a high-ranking Kuwaiti figure who was a senior commander in the Nusra brigades or in one of the other Al-Qaeda affiliated groups. The exact name of the group doesn't come to my mind right now, but there were many operations whereby we had targeted assassinations, which did have a very, very big impact on what took place here, on the morale, on the collapse of these groups. Now, what I'm going to show you now is a school where the armed groups had also taken refuge. This is an elementary school, which I'm going to show you right now, which has been completely destroyed as a result of the air campaign, the air raid launched by the Syrian army prior to entering the city. This here is a playground now, which I'm going to show you. This is the playground, the main schoolyard, as you can see. Another place which the armed groups had transformed into a base for them. So basically, that is the situation. You know, what we had was the armed groups seeking refuge. Around 10,000 militants had taken refuge here in this city of Yabroud. The Syrian army prepared with the air bombardment. That was the beginning. Then what we saw was the Syrian army, together with Hezbollah, taking over the hilltops which overlook this city. Before then, the first line of defense collapsed, and hence we had the seizing of the city by the Syrian army and by Hezbollah. What remains now is a village called the Flita, which is in that direction. That remains to be a source of refuge for the militants. Flita, actually, if I can show you right now, if you can see a mountain behind me, that is where the Flita area is. That's where we still have some militants, or we still have actually quite significant presence of militants, but Flita is a lot smaller than Yabroud, a village, and hence taking over Flita would not be considered to be very difficult, particularly after the morale of these fighters is very much in collapse. So that would make taking over additional villages now a lot more easier, because the high fighting spirit or the morale would have been completely devastated after what took place here in Yabroud. And we have to mention, for example, there was one militant leader who was in Yabroud before this confrontation took place, who said, for example, this will be the graveyard of Hezbollah. So when you make such threats and pin your hopes on this battle, that is, and once this battle doesn't go the way you say and was actually taken over very easily, that is a very, very devastating blow to the morale. And one would expect that the surrounding areas now will be taken over quite easily. So a very significant phase which we have here in this city, and just one more very important achievement for the Syrian army. This, as you can see here behind me as well, what we have is more destruction. The destruction due to the, again, this destruction is not the result of combat, armed fire between the different groups. This destruction here is the result of Syrian air bombardment before the army entered into the city.
And Ali, are we getting an idea about what life was like when the insurgents were in control of this town of Yabroud? Certainly, of course, we can see a lot of the infrastructure is now destroyed, as you said, with the bombardments and the fighting that took place. But do we have any idea about what life was like in this town, or in other places, in fact, where insurgents are in control or have been in control?
Well, no, we don't have a clear idea of what it was like here in Yabroud, for example. But what we do know from other areas where the insurgents are in control is that people have very much turned against them. Even from what I hear, even those who were supporting the opposition beforehand, once they saw the emergence of these extremist groups, once the situation or developments unfolded, then of course the situation changed, and the stance of these people also changed with regards to the opposition. So the people, Syrian people now, we can say probably more than 50% are now supporting the Syrian government after what they saw from the practices they saw from the Syrian opposition.
Okay, Ali, thanks very much for that. That was Ali Risk speaking to us live from the liberated town of Yabroud on the Lebanese border with Syria.